Hello, and welcome back to Breaking Badness. Today, we're kicking off our 5-part Black Hat edition, where we speak about the top-of-mind topics in cybersecurity. The Breaking Badness team was on the ground at Black Hat, and we had the chance to speak to some fascinating guests. This series takes us through those conversations. To start off, as all things in 2024, we're exploring how AI and machine learning are revolutionizing cybersecurity. From real-time threat detection to evolving vulnerabilities in AI models, our guests will provide unique insights into how these technologies are shaping the future of cybersecurity. In this episode, you'll hear from Mark Wojtasiak, VP of Product at Vectra AI, Carl Froggett, CIO at Deep Instinct, Dan Fernandez, Staff Product Manager at Chainguard, and Marcus Ludwig, CEO and founder of Ticura. Along with your hosts, Callie Fensel, Sean McNee, Daniel Schwalbe, and Taylor Wilkes-Pierce. Let's dive in. For our listeners, before we get too deep in the weeds, can you describe how endpoint detection and response, EDR, has typically worked?
Yeah, so if you look, and again, part of my career was moving from what I'll call a signature-based technology solution back in the day, moving into EDR. And EDR's not new. It's got to be at least 15 years old at this point. From an EDR perspective, at the time, the challenge was really twofold. One, the threat landscape moved. And back in the day, and I'm happy to get into the detail, we had signatures and a new virus came out. We didn't call it malware back in the day, right? A new virus came out, you'd write a new signature and you'd be fine. And then the bad actors changed and they started to find out different ways of bypassing signatures. And one of those ways was just to alter a virus a little bit, so get a variant, bypasses the signature.
If we start taking this to the next level, now the next new thing is AI. Right? And if you take EDR where it's at, discovering certain signatures and pushing them down to the clients, now with AI, you can probably start doing things like, this seems likely or similar to other events that are happening. You talk about how AI is folding into this mix now, where we're moving.
EDR today, most of the big players certainly, it's machine learning. It's a form of AI, and it always has been. So they may run a machine learning kind of endpoint, I'll call it, but they certainly using machine learning in their cloud to do analytics. Now again, 10, 15 years ago, this was great. The bad actors were put on the back foot. But like all good technologies, right, it's an arms race, and now the bad actors have found many ways to bypass EDR. So EDR already has AI in it, and we see this all the time in the marketing, right? AI, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, we all have it. We're carrying it in our pocket. So what the audience need to look at is what sort of AI. Most AI that everybody's talking about in this hall here at Black Hat is machine learning. But it's really important to understand the differences and how they work, and there's some fundamental differences between machine learning and deep learning that bring a lot of value when you're talking about threat and prevention of threat using deep learning over machine learning.
Because in deep learning, you can create certain models and you can do transfer learning from one model to another model. So certain data you learn from, you can find these patterns, the neural networks, you can have these layers. You can say, I want to reuse some of these layers for a new model, where you can take other data and apply it and build additional layers and compress them down. You can have fun where models fight against each other to learn their differences. Deep learning is a whole new world.
And this is one of the fundamental differences of deep learning over machine learning. Machine learning needs to be constantly trained, constantly updated, which is why we have this big ecosystem from those current approaches. They're, like I say, are 10 to 15 years old. They've had a good run. But I think if you look at the breaches and some of the high-profile breaches, we've got to start to say, hey, it's not living up anymore. Just like signatures started to degrade in the face of the bad actors figuring it out, we're already seeing that with that EDR machine learning approach. We need a more preventative approach, right? And the bad actors are now leveraging the same generative AI to create their attack chain end to end. So if I put it out there that, 2 years ago, ChatGPT made a big splash, right? We're less than 2 years in to this cycle of bad actors figuring out how to use generative AI to create advanced malware, deepfakes. When ChatGPT was released in the following couple of months, phishing went up by almost 1,300%.
Oh, wow.
Because guess what? Bad actors go, hey, I've got a new tool. How can I use it? Just like the good guys are trying to do the defense, they're doing the attack. If we look at some of the statistics in there about the threat of generative AI, and this report is from practitioners, right? Mm-hmm. I'm very keen to stress this is not a CISO, whatever. This is security operations. These are the people who are using the tools that we all provide every day as a community from a cyber perspective. So it's an interesting take, because I say this is like real life. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're really worried about the use of generative AI. I like to push or talk about the University of Indiana published some research in January. So bearing in mind, ChatGPT was, 2 years ago? They published some research, and I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but they found over 13,000 dark AI, which is the new term. Oh. So they found over 13,000 LLMs, generative AI, on the dark web that had either been compromised or the safeguards removed so that they could be weaponized by the bad actors. That's a crazy number. And then they found LLMs and services that were stitching it together, from writing the phishing email to your grandma about cryptocurrency, if I want to twist it a little bit, delivering a newly written, unique malware that's never been seen before, analyzing the vulnerabilities of how they're going to use it. And we're only at the start of this. It's only been 2 years.
I wanted to ask you about supply chain security, or especially like what is AI supply chain security. So I guess, first of all, what is it? And why is it important in today's digital landscape?
Yeah, sure. So obviously, as we probably have all heard, AI is catching a lot of steam, particularly the generative AI use cases or the usage of large language models. But AI is more than just generative AI. There's a substantial number of applications that have been in production that use machine learning. For example, DomainTools risk scoring engine is like a machine learning model, not necessarily Gen AI. In every industry, there are use cases for predictive models and forecasting and a number of other areas.
Gotcha. Okay. And how does AI impact security of supply chains compared to traditional methods?
Yeah, great question. I would say a lot of it is like traditional application security, but because we have these new components, some of which are very new, there's a lot to be uncovered. Some of these libraries, some of the tools that are available are basically written within the last 10 years, as opposed to other programming languages that have been around for a while, other tools that have been around for a while. There's been more research, more CVEs uncovered. One of the complexities of the space is that it still holds everything that's true for application security, but it also introduces this model as a new component. Okay. If you have, for example, a self-hosted generative AI application, because in some industries you're concerned with data privacy, so you don't want to use a third party, and now you have to host these applications, and you may need GPUs to run these applications. Now there's a whole set of other dependencies there that allow you to access the GPUs, and that's just more components that need to be considered in the supply chain now.
So do you have an idea of the current threats and vulnerabilities in AI supply chain security, or can you give me some examples?
Yeah, sure. There was a common list. The other thing probably to make a distinction that is unique to machine learning is that what I just described is like the different components of an application, but there's the machine learning lifecycle in itself, where when you're building a model for the first time, and this mostly applies to non-generative AI because those are very expensive to build and to train, up to $1 billion, I think some of the latest metrics on that. But if you're building a machine learning model for the first time, you may start with a data scientist development environment, which may include things like Python notebooks or Jupyter notebooks. Okay. So that is one potential vector of vulnerabilities, where that component, you essentially import a lot of libraries or packages that are needed for the development. One specific example, this has gotten a lot better, is the type of squatting, but for packages in the Python ecosystem, because there wasn't as much of a rigorous check on who is able to publish and validation of what is being published. So you could, for example, introduce a maliciously named package with a remote access vulnerability in it.
What tools or technologies would you say are essential?
If you're building a model, and let's focus on generative AI and then talk about the other areas. For generative AI, if you're building an application using a third party, you may need components that interface with that large language model to basically manage the history of the request, parse the request. If you're exposing your own data through a RAG style application, then you connect your enterprise data sources. You may also need basically a web application if you're exposing this directly to customers. So a use case could be like a customer support bot that would help expedite the issues that a customer may have. So you have APIs that are connecting to the third-party APIs for the large language model APIs that are going to databases. There may be other integrations with other agents that do like real-time lookups of data. So there's a lot of potential components depending on the use case.
Can you give me some examples of maybe common challenges organizations face when securing AI in the supply chains? Or are there any obstacles that need to be overcome?
There was a lot of talk this week at Black Hat about AI safety and AI security, and that it's a whole, we could probably spend a lot of time just talking about like the safety aspect of it. But there's generally, when using this, even open source models, there's not always a lot of transparency of like, how was this built? Where is the data coming from? Some of the challenges also is that if you want to make it useful for a RAG style application, for example, you have to expose your data store. So now you're on the hook for making sure that the large language model is not accessing data that it shouldn't. So proper access controls are going to be required. But then for the rest of all the components, like you now have to take care of new additional libraries that are used to build a model or to run your model. And sometimes in some cases, the data science teams are not always focused on starting with the most secure component. They just want the latest and greatest tool, even though it may or may not be fully vetted yet by experts.
So how do you see this evolving in the next few years?
Yeah, so I think the main area that has to evolve, I think, is that while we're focusing in a very important sub-segment of AI, which is generative AI, there's a whole spectrum of other applications that are not getting as much attention.
Really?
Because if you're a financial institution, you have a risk scoring model for fraudulent card transactions. Like that has been in place for over a decade. That also has to be secure, not just the generative AI applications that are out there. So I think that we should also discuss and spend more time talking about AI security more broadly, not just generative AI security. I think that would be an important thing to work on over the next few years, just to bring the awareness that there's all these other use cases that also need our attention. It's a combination. It depends. In some regulated environments, and actually it's an interesting component, there is some regulation that will introduce additional scrutiny into AI systems in general that would include those other non-generative AI use cases. I would say the reason is just a distraction and the bandwidth that's available, and Gen AI is getting all the attention right now. So I would say that's the main reason.
Where do you see the different LLM providers in their journey towards better data supply chain security? And then where do you all see Chainguard fitting in?
Yeah, it's important that I think we mentioned briefly is there's a lot of the same application security concepts that apply to AI. There's just a few extra components. So maybe one example where it's slightly unique is that if you're hosting a GPU enabled workload on a container, for example, there's like a lot of additional components, drivers, libraries, CUDA libraries. There's a very strict, and I'm trying to find good words to describe it, but it's very hard to align the right versions of CUDA with Python, with all the other. So there's a lot of issues with getting that to work. So that's a lot of hard work beyond the minimization of CVEs. It's very hard to get these GPU containers to work.
They work in the first place. Passing through the GPUs directly into the container, it's not easy.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of pain associated with that, but some of these components they are relatively new. So there's going to be an increasing number of vulnerabilities that are going to be found in them just because some of these technologies are less than 10 years old. So I think most of the biggest concerns now is like the standard images that are available are just full of vulnerabilities. So I think that's going to be the first thing to mitigate. But there's all sorts of problems that could lead to, you mean container escapes and things
Yeah.
of that nature.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that evolves because some of these tools, like I said, are still, and some of these libraries are evolving pretty fast.
Yeah.
So we'll have to see.
Before we start recording, I learned a really cool thing about Vectra AI and how long you've been doing AI. Can you share that with our listeners?
Oh, yeah. One of our founders, Hitesh, he's the CEO. He's a great story. He was like 12 years, I think,
That's
2011.
a long
I think
time.
we founded the company. Then it was all around why it was founded was like back then networking companies were the thing and a lot of security was rooted in the network and companies were getting breached. The network controls were getting breached or bypassed or things were happening. Attackers were getting onto the network. And Hitesh was like, I think there's probably a better way to tackle this problem. What if we threw AI at it? Before AI was even anything, right? It was like, before it was cool, there's AI everywhere. What if we used AI to find attack signal inside of network data, right? What if we used it, again, asking questions. What are attackers doing once they're in the network? Can we use AI and ML to understand their behaviors?
How would you describe today's threat landscape?
Chaotic?
That's fair.
It's always going to be.
Yeah.
Really? I think one thing we say is the enterprise is going to be hybrid forever. It's always going to be a mix of on-prem and cloud, and some enterprises are all cloud, but for the most part, hybrid. And what we've seen is, so are attackers, so are the adversaries. Can we keep pace? And this is where these are the sorts of things that we're going to start to think like, how can AI really help? And so I think, it's chaotic, it's ever-changing.
Given that Vectra's been in this space for a long time, you've been applying AI and better processes to help do the alerting and identifying important signals to say, hey, stuff is happening. And now bad actors are powering up with their own AI too.
Yeah.
So are we seeing AI fighting AI? What's happening now?
I'm not a big fan of that term, but it's always attacker versus defender.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And who's going to, the attackers are always going to try and sidestep things. They're always going to try it, and defenders are always going to try to catch them early and, when possible, prevent them from getting in the first place.
So one of the reason I asked Daniel to be here, not because he's not a good podcaster, because he is, but we've got two native German speakers here. So I thought we do have a German contingent listening to the podcast. If you want to do a couple minutes in German, you can do that, and I will pretend like I know what you're talking about, and I hope it's not about me.
Ja, hallo alle zusammen, unsere deutschen Freunde überall in der Welt.
Ja, schön.
Ja.
Hallo, schön sein
Ja.
und total interessant.
Ja,
in Las
super.
Vegas sich so zu treffen, dann auf Deutsch mal kurz ein paar Minuten
Ja,
Podcast.
uns zu unterhalten. Ja, toll. Ist immer, ich bin jetzt hier seit 27 Jahren und immer mal wieder findet man jemand, der auch Deutsch spricht. Und dann guck schon mal einen Namen. Like, oh, das könnte sein, weil es sind auch so viele Namen hier, wo die Leute seit 3 Generationen hier sind.
Ja.
Aber ja, ist schon ganz toll, wenn man jemanden findet, wo man schon mal sprechen kann.
Ja, super. Bist du öfter in Deutschland?
4-mal im Jahr geschäftlich.
Okay.
Ja, ist immer ganz gut.
Ja, nett.
Ja.
Ja, 3-4 Mal im Jahr bin ich vielleicht in den USA.
Genau.
Ja, super.
Yeah.
Freut mich.
All right, we can switch back to English.
I heard podcast. I was like, cool, that's insane. I'm so upset that I don't speak a second language.
It's never too late.
So we're at Black Hat and DEF CON this week, and I think we talk a lot about things that are troubling us within the industry while we're here. So what's something that keeps you up at night?
I'm especially looking at the AI language that is used pretty much at every single brand's sign here.
My joke is from AI to zero trust.
That's a good one.
Yeah, like it. Yeah, and it is confusing because it's most of the times not true. AI has a lot to provide to customers and make life easier, but it's not the silver bullet, for sure not. Where you are able to use real mathematics to solve a problem, you will be less noisy and more accurate than with an AI model. And AI models are not applicable to every problem you have. Yeah. And I don't like that this is not told to the customers, right?
Marcus, conversely, what's exciting you right now in the industry? What are you passionate about?
What I like is that besides the claims, that the focus is more on making it simpler to customers. So in the past, I would say 10 years, 15 years, the security solutions became more and more complex. And you had to have experts to actually use and make use out of those security solutions. Nowadays, you don't have those experts. There is a shortage of people, of skills, and you need to make it easier for the customer. And I think that is a trend that keeps continuing, right? Less tools, easier to use, more value for your money. I like that development. Yeah.
Do you like that, Dan?
I do, but I'm also, just back to what we're just talking about, I'm concerned when there are certain products or vendors introducing AI to make things easier, and we have a problem in the industry where we don't have enough sort of junior people coming in that can do the base work and work their way up. Okay, hiring an entry-level position must have 2 years of experience. Like, what? No. So I'm concerned, I'm watching this very closely, that there's possibly this tendency to be like, oh yeah, you just hire anybody, put them in from AI, they can push some buttons and everything will work. I'm like, no, you still have to invest in your people and train them. AI can make things easier, some automation can be much more streamlined, but I'm concerned that when we start trusting AI more instead of that actual analyst who can look at this critically and be like, no, this doesn't look right, I'm a little worried where that's headed.
Yeah, oversimplification of the real problem solution and work.
Thank you to all of our guests. We hope you enjoyed part 1, and we will be back next week with part 2 of our Black Hat series, where we're tackling supply chain security and third-party risk.
That's about all we have for this week. You can find us on Twitter @DomainTools. All of the articles mentioned today will be included in our blog post, which can be found at blog.domaintools.com. Catch us every Wednesday at 9 a.m. Pacific Time when we publish our podcast and blog. That's it for this week. We'll see you again next week on another episode of Breaking Badness. Until then, remember, don't drink and click.